Hey, what's going on, U.S. history people? We're back with video 37. This one is going to focus on immigration, the KKK, and the Scopes trial. Three very important topics from the 1920s. So, Mr. Lawrence, please start us off talking about immigration prior to the 1920s.
All right, so we need to rewind a little bit and go back to earlier history to kind of look at American immigration prior to the 1920s, prior to the end of World War I. So the U.S. followed a policy of what was referred to as unrestricted immigration except for Asia. So for most areas of the world, the U.S. really didn't put limits on who could come to the United States prior to the 1920s. There were limits, though, for the peoples of Asia. This is kind of what we call that old immigration that we studied earlier this year. Many of these immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe, so places like Italy and Poland. This is referred to as new immigration. So prior to the 1920s, we're talking old immigration with very limited restrictions. After the 1920s, we have new immigration, and we're going to start seeing more restrictions put on this policy.
So in the 1920s, immigration is going to drastically come to a halt. In 1921, we have the passage of the Emergency Quota Act, which will restrict the number of immigrants from a country to 3% of the total people from that country living in the U.S. in 1910. So for example, if there are 100 people living in the U.S. in 1910 from Italy, only 3 people from Italy could immigrate to the United States. This act will also put a quota of about 165,000 total immigrants to the United States. So we see immigration essentially come to a screeching halt in the 1920s. 3 years later, Calvin Coolidge signs the National Origins Act, which cut the quota from 3% down to 2%, further restricting immigration. And this is going to be on the books of U.S. law until 1965.
So in the 1920s, we also unfortunately see the return of the Ku Klux Klan. So we talked about the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction and kind of their reaction against the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, specifically in the South. And then we see a reemergence in the 1920s as a reaction against new immigration. So at this time, there was a movie produced called Birth of a Nation. It was a movie that glorified the Ku Klux Klan and portrayed African Americans in a very negative light. It was actually screened at the White House by President Woodrow Wilson's administration at the time. So characteristics of the 1920s Ku Klux Klan was really anti-African American, so they're anti-Semitic, and also anti-Catholic. So by the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan is spreading from the South to other regions of the country out west and up north as well, and becomes involved even within politics of this time period.
So John T. Scopes is a science teacher, was a science teacher from Tennessee. He was charged with teaching the theory of evolution. So in the 1920s, we're going to see debates between religion and science. And Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is very controversial during this time. And John Scopes will actually teach this controversial theory in public schools. And he was found guilty of violating a Tennessee law that forbade the teaching of evolution. He had to pay a $100 fine for it. And this is an example of debates over science versus religion in the 1920s.
All right, so let's quickly recap this video. We have new immigration in the 1920s, people coming specifically from Southern and Eastern Europe. We see the passage of the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the National Origins Act of 1924, both passed to limit immigration. We also see the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist, really terrorist organization in the South, but starting to spread north and also connect with politics. And we also see the Scopes trial, the debate between science and
religion
in the 1920s.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. Look forward to seeing you back here for video 38, the Harlem Renaissance and Marcus Garvey. Best of luck on all your tests, and have a good day.